Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday the 19th of January 2022, and in this programme we will be discussing the presidency of Joe Biden, as tomorrow is his first anniversary since he was inaugurated as America's 46th president. So we'll be analysing, we'll be discussing his performance as president in terms of domestic policy, in terms of foreign policy, and what he's done or hasn't done to advance Christian freedoms in the United States and around the world. It's great to see you, Regan, and I can't believe it's actually a year since Joe Biden was inaugurated as America's 46th president. It feels like we've gone through a decade in the past year.
Yeah, time flies in one way. It doesn't feel like a year. At the same time, I'm looking at the reality that we have 3 more years of this pain to go through, and we pray that things will change at the next election. But it's not been a great first year, and I'm not just saying that as someone who is generally very critical of Democrat policies and whatnot. That's also the resounding take by people cross-party after 1 year of a Biden presidency. You can look, and I was sharing earlier with you, Simon, some of the stuff that I've been reading across various different media outlets, articles in The Guardian that are saying he's failed, articles in the BBC saying he's failed. The statistics, the polls that are out there are just incredible. An article earlier in the Daily Mail assessing said that 37% of Americans have given him a failing grade for his first year, and that's more giving Biden a failing grade for his first year than gave Trump a failing grade for his first. 52% have said that he is a weak leader. And indeed, if you look at the past year and you try to think, what has Biden actually succeeded on, even in regard to his very liberal policies, you're going to be hard-pressed to find something where you can say he's had some resounding victories.
And despite the fact that he holds 2 houses of Congress, both the Senate and Congress itself. So that's extraordinary.
Biden claimed he would be a unity candidate. He claimed that he would be that he would bring the country together. I mean, this was the big thing, you know, in 2008 when he was vice president. Obama's big word was change. Change we can believe in, and now we have this unity. You know, I'm going to bring everyone together. You know, this is democracy. It succeeded, and you know, this is a quote that I found neat in a BBC article. The only thing that unites the nation is mutual loathing. And that's what it seems like sometimes when I'm observing it.
Absolutely. So going on that theme of Joe Biden being the healing candidate, that he would heal the rifts and the pains over the Obama administration and then the Trump administration. This is what Douglas Murray has said. He said that Joe Biden promised that he would be a unity candidate to heal the bitter political divisions in America. Instead, those divisions have become deeper and more dangerous. He has branded half of the US electorate who voted for Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election as a mere step away from treason and domestic terrorists. In terms of executive orders, in his first month alone, he passed 77 executive orders to overturn everything that President Trump did, and has done the complete opposite to what President Trump did while he was in office. And President Trump only passed 55 executive orders in 2017 alone. So just to let you know, we are live, we are interactive tonight. So the big question for tonight's program is, how has Joe Biden fared as a US president in his first year in office? And I'll let you guys be the jury. And we want to know your response.
There's also been some question in regard to his handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Some say that he's failed as a result of giving over the power to the U.S. states to manage. Personally, I think it would have been a lot worse had Biden tried to manage it himself. Certainly, we see that the mandates he's attempted for various things have been quashed by the Supreme Court. His Build Back Better campaign as well, which was designed to boost key infrastructure projects.
$1 trillion US as well.
Incredible. $1 trillion US is I mean, you've said it right there with $1 trillion. It threatens to destroy the U.S. economy. There's widespread unrest due to the inflation soaring. There's problems that persist, that have persisted and been kind of on hand for a while, but increased problems with the supply chain, supermarket shelves that are increasingly sparse or empty. It's not been a great year for Biden. In addition to some of the policies, and this is where it is personal, this is where it gets a bit tough, there's question regarding his mental capacity.
Absolutely.
Simon, I've watched some videos where Biden has been speaking, and he's caught in candid moments, even speaking, having conversation, and you kind of lean back and you think, are we dealing with someone who's playing with the full deck, so to speak? He is confused. Basic things. Okay, you can trip over words sometimes. You can stutter sometimes. Yeah, that's normal. That's fine. But to misplace common names.
He keeps calling Kamala Harris his vice president, President Harris.
Yeah.
There are serious question marks over his mental capacity for the job. I mean, look, to be president has got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Of course.
You have to deal with so much information coming your way, so many quick decisions you've got to make, and some of those decisions affect national security, so you need to be alert about what's going on, what's happening, the implications of all of this. And it's a tough job even for someone in their kind of 40s and 50s to take on the job, who are probably at their kind of political peak. But then to be almost 80 and do this when your mind is fatigued, you're forgetting things, you're not in control of things. All I can say is the Oval Office must be a complete mess. That's all I can say. The functioning of the White House must be a complete and utter mess.
His relationship with Vice President Kamala Harris has rapidly deteriorated. Now, granted, it was never a strong relationship. There were sweary interactions between Jill Biden and Kamala Harris in 2019 after some of the debates, at which Kamala Harris strongly implied that Joe Biden is a racist. And there's always been this tension between them. You kind of wonder what was the point of having someone who you have not really gotten along with being in such close proximity to you politically. She has had plummeting approval ratings. Her staff she cannot keep a hold of, which always points to a management issue.
And bullying.
She has been accused right and left of bullying. The atmosphere in her office is said to be toxic and poisonous. So in one way, it shouldn't be any surprise when the two cannot hold their own houses together, so to speak. They cannot keep things together between themselves, and they can't keep things internally going in a healthy way, that their approval ratings are so low. Foreign policy, disaster. We look at this past year, Simon, we talked about the Afghan crisis several weeks before it actually began transpiring. I don't think we fully knew the depth to which this would be a disaster. It's just
and also the biggest disaster as well is re-entering the Iranian nuclear agreement with the Iranians, despite the fact that the Iranians have appointed, because only those candidates that are chosen by the Supreme Leader Khomeini are able to stand in any presidential elections in Iran. So they appointed the most hard-line government in Iran's history. And yet Biden is talking about giving the Iranians billions in sanctions relief so that they can continue to carry on their nuclear weapons program. We see that Putin's on the verge of invading Ukraine, whereas it's only now that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has actually flown out to the Ukraine to try and de-escalate the conflict. We see China rise as a major power, threatening Taiwan, with America pretty much quiet. And also the other thing is there hasn't been an investigation into COVID-19 and China's possible role in all of that. So all of these things are leading to international chaos. There's even huge mistrust amongst NATO members in Europe, whether they can trust the Americans under his leadership. And the whole situation, you've got to say, is an absolute shambles. It's all falling apart before his eyes. We got any emails?
We do indeed. Johnny says, on every possible level, Biden's presidency gets a fail. Even the dishonest media can't be bothered covering for him quite as much as they used to. He is the rambling front man for those seeking to run down and ultimately destroy America and the West. The tragic thing is, Johnny, I think in some way he and his supporters continue to believe that he's the answer, that he can bring the change. I don't believe that Joe Biden is president and he's plotting to destroy America. I think in a depraved way they actually think this is the answer somehow. Hi guys, don't know, think Biden has been governing. Reckon he's just a puppet of the globalist, as he's not quite the full shilling. I could say a lot more, but you get the drift. Yeah, not quite the full shilling. I like that. So, look, he's endangered Israeli security. You were just touching a little bit on the Iran deal there. He's also shown support for the Palestinian Authority. He was disrespectful to the then Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. It was a significant time.
26
it was weeks.
days, around 26 days before he actually called him.
Over 3 weeks before he even called him. This is one of the USA's closest allies, and that there was no communication.
Yeah. But is it any wonder really, Regan, because when we go back to the election of 2020, what becomes very, very clear is that America was clearly affected by COVID-19. Then we had all this postal ballots in for the first time in terms of the voting, which has been opened up to kind of election fraud. And there are so many cases and evidence of election fraud actually taking place. Is it any? And he didn't do any campaigning. He just stayed in the bunker. He did virtually no campaigning whatsoever. And when those elections were coming through, it looked like, Trump won Florida, and that was an indication that he was going to go on and be re-elected. But all the key states ended up voting for Biden, despite the fact that President Trump resided over America's economy, the strongest it's actually ever been. And so we have this situation there, and it seems like this government is illegitimate. Despite it having the White House, Congress, and the Senate, what we're seeing is an illegitimate government that doesn't have the support of the people. Plus, also, it's governing from such a progressive agenda, knowing America's not a progressive country. So, is it any wonder that everything's falling apart at the seams?
Hi, Simon and Regan. Like you, I think President Biden is not healthy enough for the job, and he is a puppet. I remember Ronald Reagan in his last years of office was relying on his wife Nancy. I can't believe that the USA never had younger candidates. It's a big country. That's from Alex. I mean, they have had younger candidates. I wouldn't say that youth is necessarily the way that the U.S. needs to go in order to fix things. I mean, if you look at Canada, you can see Justin Trudeau, or if you look over to France, and I know these are different countries, but they have a degree of Western civilization in their structure. You can look at Emmanuel Macron, and you can see, okay, age isn't always the
We have Bill
criteria.
Clinton, you have Tony Blair, classic examples.
So, but I think you are right, Alex. I do have to agree with you that there probably should be a time where people say, you know what, I think I need to call it a day. Biden has been, throughout his life, serving, we'll be generous, we'll say, throughout his life, Biden has served the country. I don't agree with most probably of what he's stood for, but he has served the country for a significant period of time.
3 failed attempts to become
exactly. Going back to, I'm trying to remember the first, but 70s, I think. 70s was, I believe, his first attempt. So he's been on the scene for a significant length of time. It would have been great had he, after the Obama years, just said, okay, over and out, I'm gone. And we wouldn't be having to deal with this dysfunction.
But I think this was the plan within the kind of Democrat Party at the very top echelons of his leadership, is that they wanted Joe Biden to become the Democratic nominee for president in the 2020 presidential elections, primarily because they felt that he was empathetic. He was the complete opposite to President Trump, and they knew that he wouldn't be in office very long. And their ultimate hope was in the Vice President Kamala Harris, believing that she would never be elected in her own right, and therefore the only ticket that would work would be to be Vice President, realizing that Biden wouldn't be long in office and she would take over as president. So it tells you everything you need to know about the Democrats right now, is that they're talking about bringing Hillary Clinton back for the 2024 presidential election. So, but let's have a real expert view on Joe Biden's first year as America's president, and this is an interview that I did earlier with Bill Koenig, who is a former US Washington correspondent. Over to Bill. We're now joined on Behind Headlines by Bill Koenig, who is a former US White House correspondent for 20 years, plus author of the book Eye to Eye, a good friend of mine, and he joins us from Texas. How are you, Bill?
Good, Simon. Great to be with you today.
Pleasure. And Bill, in this program today, we're marking the first anniversary since Joe Biden became America's 46th president. What do you make of his presidency 1 year on?
Well, it's been a failure. Virtually everything he's touched has not gone well. He's way over his head. His political party has got some radical progressives that are after, massive amount of future deficits to fund their agenda. That's not working well. In the U.S. Senate, we have a 50-50 split between the Republicans and the Democrats, but there's a filibuster rule that allows, you basically need 60 votes in order to get legislation through. So he and Chuck Schumer, who both in the past have vehemently opposed getting rid of the filibuster legislation, attempting to do that so they could get back to a 50-50 majority, which would give the vice president the swing vote necessary for his agenda. Well, Senator Manchin and Sinema said, no, we're not interested. So he doesn't know what to do. His agenda is in neutral. Everything he's touched, whether it has to do with COVID, whether it has to do with our supply chain issues, on and on and on, has been a failure. We can go down a long list. What's happening in Afghanistan? Look what's happening with Russia. Look what's happening with China. Look what's happening, domestically. We're talking about a president's approval rating at the lowest level ever. in his first 12 months. And a lot of us don't see it getting any better, Simon.
Many international observers, when they look at Joe Biden, see him as an incredibly old man, a very weak president. We know that his own advisors keep him away from the media because he struggles to put a conversation, even put a sentence together. What is his mental state, and is he strong enough and has the capacity to actually be president, particularly at his age?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Trump was always available to the media, whether they liked him or hated him. He was always available, always willing to take questions. Biden avoids questions. He goes, when he does have his initial briefings with the press, he follows the notes. He might take one or two questions from his favorable media, and then he leaves. And we've gone from one extreme where Trump was always available and always willing to say something to a president that they're basically trying to keep from the public. He's an embarrassment. He can't remember names of even members of his cabinet. He can't put two and two together. His facts are false. Or when I say facts are false, his statements are false. Facts are facts, but his statements are false. He gets angry. He gets annoyed when he's questioned. And he is just completely over his head. And it's tragic because our enemies, China, Russia, North Korea, and even Iran are watching this. And they're all going to do something. We don't know when. They're all going to do something. And then after that Afghan debacle, that was one of the greatest, most embarrassing debacles in the history of our country. And I might add that Biden and Obama were involved with bailing out of Iraq, which helped birth ISIS too when he was vice president. So obviously there's a lot of concern here domestically about his lack of wherewithal, but also in terms of handling some very serious international issues that could have a great impact on our country.
And for our UK viewers, Bill, can you describe how the Biden administration is doing in terms of Christian liberties and Christian freedoms? Because we hear very much about this extreme progressive agenda that his administration has, and also which is held also by the Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Well, when you look at some of the executive orders that he put in place, I thought about that this morning before we got on this interview. Immediately, when he took office, he brought the abortion funding back in place without going into detail. Transgenderism was a very important thing to him. The LGBTQ agenda was very important. The vaccine mandates were very important. Vaccine or mask wearing, forcing that in the public square. The way he handled the bailing out of Afghanistan for Judeo-Christian or for Jews and Christians that are concerned about the United States position in the Middle East, and also especially with Israel. A lot of these things were extremely problematic. And he has done nothing for religious rights. He has no concern about it. It's never even a thought. Every once in a while, he'll talk about, he's in church or going to mass on Sunday, but look, there's no fruit here at all. And his positions are diabolically opposed to what we follow as Judeo-Christian values here in our country.
Bill, what do you think of this statement made by this social political commentator in the UK called Douglas Murray? And he said in a recent article that Joe Biden positioned himself as being the kind of moderate character and the president that would bring unity to the country. But he said he's already created greater divisions than President Trump ever did, and has accused half of the US population that voted for President Trump as being a mere step away from treason, and called them domestic terrorists. How does that bring unity to a very fractured nation and society that America is today?
Well, a lot of us conservative have always appreciated Douglas Murray. He's extremely popular among conservatives in the U.S. He's on Fox quite often, and he usually just flat and nails it. He really sees it for what it is. And this is the most divisive president we've probably ever had in office, and even he's mentioned even more so than Trump. He is alluding to the fact that the conservatives that oppose him are domestic terrorists. Even last week, they established a domestic terrorism department to go after white supremacy. Well, they're going after anybody that opposes this government, this liberal government, this anti-God government. But to establish this entity within the Justice Department to focus on domestic terrorism is absurd. We don't have that problem. And when we have a problem, unfortunately, on January 6th last year, those people, there were some radicals for sure. But it was a small group of people, unarmed, and they keep being called insurrectionists. And it's the reason that they think that we need to establish a new division within the Justice Department to keep an eye on these people. It's a travesty. And a lot of people see it for what it is. And I tell you one thing, as far as a division, very divisive. And I tell you another thing, it's important in any election, the independents who are independent, they see it for what it is. They aren't necessarily Republicans or Democrats. They see it for what it is. And they consider Joe Biden a very significant problem and a liability to our country. And they are moving quickly toward the Republican side. The Republican Party is picking up many independents and even liberals or even Democrats, maybe more moderate Democrats, because they see this travesty that we have in the White House.
And Bill, we had at the G7 summit in Cornwall back in June, President Biden making these big globalist plans to bring America back into these globalist institutions. But it seems to be the reality that we're seeing under his presidency, America go into a policy of isolationism, like we saw in the 1920s and the 1930s, rather than confronting the growing evil threats we're facing around the world on his watch. For example, we're seeing that that Putin has been emboldened and amassing over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border, ready to attack. We see the Chinese on the verge of attacking Taiwan. He's empowered the Iranian regime by re-entering into the failed Iranian nuclear weapons agreement. And then on top of that, he's also empowered the Palestinian Authority against Israel and is threatening Israel's security, and question marks over America's leadership with NATO are being asked. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's like every time he makes a move, Simon, it's harmful. Bailing out of Afghanistan. China is moving into a position of influence and power in Afghanistan as they look at the $2 to $3 trillion in rare earth minerals and the Bagram Air Force Base. So we have billions of dollars invested in. There's a chance China will be operating out of there soon. As far as Taiwan, we'll concerned about Taiwan after the Olympics in the early part of February. What will China do then? Putin knows exactly what he's dealing with. He spent 45 to 50 minutes with Biden on the phone the other day, or in a conference call the other day. He knows what he's dealing with. Russian intelligence knows how fast Biden is diminishing. In Iran, they're master negotiators. They're developing, according to an article in the New Yorker just a couple of weeks ago, they have missiles, sophisticated missiles deployed all across the Middle East, and rockets. And the article even said that Iran now has more missiles and rockets deployed around the Middle East than Israel and the United States. What's Iran going to do? They're going to play the international community to their benefit, to their advantage. So right now, the enemies of our state, the enemies of our country are waiting. They're patient. They're strategic. They got a plan and they have their timing. That's what's bothersome and worrisome to us as we watch this president of the United States continue to diminish mentally on a weekly basis, as well at the same time, Simon, his popularity, or let me put it better, rather than say popularity, his approval rating is crashing to levels not known as a president.
And Bill, my final question is that can Joe Biden hang on till the 2024 presidential election, or do you think that Kamala Harris will actually take over, or will the Democrats come up with new presidential candidates, even discussion and about Hillary Clinton coming back for 24? And also we hear the news that President Trump has consolidated his power on the Republican Party and could be back in 2024. Or what do you make of that news?
Well, the way I look at it right now is, first of all, most Democrats don't expect Biden to be able to run in 2024. He's about to turn 80. He's diminishing. Some people are saying, how's he going to get through this year? There's bad blood between the Biden administration members and Harris's team, Biden team, Harris team. Joe Biden's very uncomfortable with Harris. There's always the concern. You used to hear about the 25th Amendment all the time, where the cabinet members will basically force out the president of the United States because of a capacity concern, a mental capacity. Well, that's a possibility, Simon. I don't know. I only God knows how this year is going to play out. But 2024 for Biden, no chance. Hillary Clinton sees a very weak Democratic bench, so all of a sudden she says, I'm going to get back into this game. Harris is weak. Her approval rate is even worse than Biden's. And again, the Democrats have a very weak bench. Trump is consolidating his power. He's an alpha male. He takes things on. A lot of people appreciate what he did, whether it had to do with Israel, our borders, and other things that are important, standing up for Christians. There's a lot of appreciation for him. 2024 is still 3 years away. A lot can happen. I know the powers to be within the Justice Department, even up in the state of New York, they're trying to do everything they can legally to try to disenfranchise Trump, or even to the point of not where he won't even be able to run. That's what they're going to attempt to do. But at the same time, the Republican base appreciates Trump. They appreciate the fighter he is, appreciate what he did in office, and only God knows who the candidates or who the nominees will be in 2024. But this is going to be a very interesting, pivotal year when it comes to Republicans. And that midterm election in November, a lot of Republicans are hoping for a large win in the House to get the majority back in the House. And it looks promising, maybe one or two members in the Senate, which will give the Senate majority to the Republicans, which will make a huge difference on the Biden administration and their agenda going forward.
Bill, I just want to thank you so much for joining us from Texas and not the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the program, my friend. And keep well, and hopefully we'll see you back on air very soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Simon. God bless you.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you to Bill and to Simon for that very helpful interview and those insights. We are live and interactive. Please keep sending in your thoughts. We have a couple here. Leslie says, good evening, Simon and Regan. Many thanks as always for such an excellent, topical and important political commentary on Biden's presidency, or more accurately, the failure thereof. She goes on to quote and highlight Biden's point that basically Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination did not have the same worldwide impact that George Floyd's death did, effectively extolling a convicted criminal above a Christian martyr, and expresses belief that Donald Trump will at some point be president once more. Personally, I'm not convinced that that's where things need to go, or where we want things to go in one way, but at the same time we pray that God would provide in the next 3 years a president who will uphold righteous values and character.
Absolutely, but we've got to get through those next 3 years, and they're going to be turbulent, that's for sure.
Just for the sake of balance here, you guys are so biased, your show is not worth watching. You should, as pastors, pray for Joe Biden. You should also have an alternative person on the show. You're spitting out your political rhetoric, and I am the reason, that's me, why there are so many false prophets in evangelical Christianity. Let me go back to you on this, Noel. In regard to bias, okay, Simon and I are unashamedly Christians. We believe in the authority of God's Word, and we believe that it is important in application in every area of life, and that includes politically. I will never vote for, support, or express support for a candidate who is progressing the same anti-Christian and anti-God values that Joe Biden is progressing. Abortion is one of those. I mean, just leading into the midterm elections at the end of this year, the Democrats are really going strong on, yeah, we're the ones if you want abortion free for all, basically. So there's that. But also, we are presenting news. And we're presenting facts here. Here's just some of the headlines from the other media outlets, just so you know that Simon and I are not just twisting things, you know, and everyone else is saying the opposite. The Hill says, as a headline, Biden hits 1 year mark in dire straits. Associated Press, after Biden's first year, the virus and disunity rage on. Financial Times speaks of his disappointing first year and then goes on to outline some of the catastrophes they're in. The Washington Examiner has spoken of it as a terrible first year, particularly highlighting the aforementioned debacle and chaotic retreat from Afghanistan, which has cost the lives of many people whose lives probably wouldn't have been lost otherwise at this point. BBC even, Joe Biden 1 year on, and they asked the question, has the U.S. become ungovernable? And the quote is, far from coming together, the U.S. is in an even more perilous state of disunion. And they root that directly in Joe Biden's presidency. He's even being mocked by some of the extreme ultra-liberal comedy shows. He can't even convince his own party. So I'm afraid I have to say, on one hand, yes, biased toward Christian values. On the other hand, this is just what everyone's saying.
Yeah. But either you believe in biblical values or you don't. Either you believe in what the Word of God says and you stick to its moral code, or you don't. And I think that distinguishes between who's a real Christian and who's not. Yeah. And I'll end it on that point. According to Mike Allen, who is one of the most influential journalists in Washington, D.C., and a former journalist with the Washington Post, has described President Biden's first year in office in these terms. The Biden agenda is collapsing right before our eyes. His approval rate is crashing and worsening by the week. The big picture. Biden, who marks 1 year in office tomorrow, has never been less popular nationally after personally lobbying his party and the public on Build Back Better, and voting rights is a complete failure. It says, why does this matter? Biden is on the verge of losing two big fights of his choosing, which are his party's control of both the Senate and the Congress. He said it's rare for a president to be at odds with the Republicans, moderate Democrats, and liberal Democrats all at once. But that is where Biden finds himself at the start of an election that many Democrats believe will result in the loss of the House and maybe the Senate.
In the 2 months since signing that $1 trillion infrastructure bill into law, President Biden has by almost every measure bombed big time on the things that matter most. White House officials hope for progress soon on a reworked version of the aforementioned Build Back Better, based on Senator Joe Manchin's public statements. Biden soon will send the Hill a COVID supplemental budget request to buy more boosters, antiviral pills, masks, and tests. Third, aides say Biden will keep pushing for voting rights legislation. Even as he conceded likely defeat for now, Biden said on the Hill yesterday, like every other major civil rights bill that came along, we can come back and try it a second time. This produced rising anger as well among black activists, members of some civil rights groups refusing to appear with Biden at a particular speech on voting in Atlanta. The New York Times columnist Charles Blow piled on, Biden has been dilly-dallying on getting rid of the filibuster to protect voting rights for essentially his whole administration until this week. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, the Senate's #2 Democrat, distanced himself from some of Biden's rhetoric in Atlanta, where he invoked the Confederacy and Bull Connor. And again, it's all part of this trying to paint anyone who opposes him as a potential domestic terrorist. And Durbin said perhaps the president went a little too far. And this seems to be an increasing problem indeed. We do have some more emails here. Good evening, all at Revelation TV. Thank you for telling us things we never hear on mainstream TV. God bless you all. Call. Graham says, hi, I'm out of the UK now. He asks the question, isn't the poor performance of President Biden moving us closer and closer to the last of the last days? Well, Biden doesn't have the power to move us closer towards, or bring about the last days. Only God knows when the Lord Jesus Christ is returning. We believe that we're in the last days, but that would be giving Biden a lot more power than he actually has.
No, absolutely. So in terms of President Biden on Christian issues, the Heritage Foundation said that the Biden administration, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so we have more emails as well, Simon. Hi, all at Revelation TV. Do you know that if you were able to work and earn £1 a second for every second, within a 24-hour period, it would take you 11 days, 13 hours, 46 minutes, 40 seconds to earn £1 million. At the same rate, it would take you 31.5 years to earn 1 billion, and 31,700 years to earn 1 trillion. The global debt at the moment is about 300 trillion. The problem is all the currencies on the planet only add up to 36.8 trillion. Therefore, you would have to work 24 hours a day for 9,500,000 years to pay off the global debt. So my question to you is, why are you wasting time reading this, Colin? Good one, Colin. But I mean, there's valid points. We're having a soaring level of inflation. We have extreme economic deprivation. We've talked about the debt in the past that the U.S. has. We've talked about how there's so much that is essentially a disaster as a result of previous economic policies, Democrats. But in this case now we see Biden's
the
plan.
interest on the debt alone must be absolutely colossal.
Yeah.
Is it the equivalent of America's own GDP is equivalent on the interest on the American debt, which is amazing how America is still a kind of world superpower today, and that America doesn't face economic ruin and absolute economic collapse. I want to talk about Christian freedoms because this is an important one. So the Heritage Foundation has stated that the Biden administration is making a stark departure from past administration about how it talks about and treats religious freedom. So the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, responded to the 2020 report on international religious freedoms in May of 21. And this is what he said. He said that religious freedom is a human right, one at the heart of what it means to be human. Unfortunately, Blinken went on to say that religious freedom is not more or less important than any other right, that all human rights are interdependent, and that religious freedom, like every human right, is universal and co-equal. So Blinken's reputation of the Commission's report is purely political because the Commission highlighted the importance of religious freedom. The progressive left saw the report as representing a stumbling block to advancing abortion and extreme liberal values, which are a top priority for Biden's administration.
We have some other emails here. Good evening to you both, Regan and Simon. I agree that we cannot compromise on biblical principles. Dr. Martin Luther King in the 60s stood up for the rights of people. I hope we can agree on that. I can't imagine how bad America went through with opposition there. All colors, creeds are counted. Bless you both always. That's from Julie. And indeed, this past Monday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's a public holiday in the United States. And one of the things that's often not recognized or remembered is that Martin Luther King was extremely critical of what he saw as this particular change and this drift in the Democratic Party, even as far back as then. He believed that the Democrats talked down to black people and that they were trying to buy the nation off, and was very critical of many of those policies, and that was a significant time ago. It's only gotten worse since then.
No, absolutely. I think the other fact to talk about is the fact that Mike Pompeo, the former US Secretary of State, was a born-again Christian, did so much to defend Christian freedoms around the world, particularly when Christians are under persecution. And it seems like the Biden administration are not interested in the persecution of Christians around the world, because this comes into direct conflict with their main agenda, and that's to push this ultra-liberal, woke agenda, progressive agenda on the United States, and the American people are reeling from it. I mean, if we, for example, we take Israel, for example, the way that the Biden administration has treated Israel has been absolutely shocking. We mentioned earlier in the program, it took over 26 days for President Biden to phone the then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We see that that Biden has also brought the Palestinian Authority in from the cold, restored their US funding, reopened their diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C. with no concessions, and they continue to push for the failed two-state solution that never worked and will never work. They're also trying to divide Jerusalem by attempting to open up the former US consulate in Jerusalem, which is in West Jerusalem, as a future embassy for a Palestinian state. And then we see there that President Biden made no distinction between America's closest ally in the Middle East and also the genocidal terrorist organization called Hamas they couldn't name during Israel's conflict against Hamas in May of 2021.
It's important to lay the blame at the Islamic Republic of Iran and terrorist proxies for this ongoing conflict in Israel, the war against Hamas in May 2021. But there can be no doubt that we have seen a shift in U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East that has emboldened the enemies of Israel and the West. And we've already spoken at the very beginning of this year of how this is going to be a big topic. This is going to be a big headline to keep our eyes on, as there's increasing unrest in that region and seemingly an increasing lack of support for Israel by the U.S. On the 13th of May of 2021, President Biden discussed that Israel, quote, has the right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. He did not explicitly condemn, however, I mean, he said they have the right to defend themselves, but he could not condemn the Hamas terror attack or state that Hamas had committed war crimes. Since that moment, President Biden has been the occupant in the White House. His administration has desired to return to that disastrous Iran deal of 2015, which permitted the Iranian regime to keep enriching uranium and develop nuclear weapons in less than a decade. And it looks like the Islamic Republic of Iran may acquire nuclear weapons under President Biden's watch.
Which will be the biggest foreign policy disaster of any US president.
Absolutely.
But also I want to touch on something that's also very important as well, is America's credibility in the world has been shattered. America's standing has been shattered. At least when President Trump was in power, whether you liked him or whether you didn't, he did scare the enemies of the West. Yeah. He was unpredictable. The North Koreans were very concerned about him. The Chinese were very concerned about Trump. Even Putin was kind of concerned about Trump. And so what we've seen now is that the enemies of the West and the enemies of America have become emboldened because of Biden's lack of engagement on the world scene.
Weak leadership.
And to stand up against bullies and dictators, because otherwise the world is becoming a very difficult place. And what we also see, which is also very, very significant, I think, Regan, as we touch on this, is that no one believes that Joe Biden is credible. No one takes anything what he actually says at face value, because they know that he's just mentally is not secure. He's a very weak leader. He talks about re-entering into these kind of global alliances and international agreements and pushing a globalist agenda. but he's pushed America back into kind of a policy of isolationism, like we saw in the 1920s and 30s with devastating consequences. But I think as we come to the end of the program, what do you think about the prospect of Donald Trump, who is currently consolidating his power over the Republican Party, could actually run again in 2024?
He could indeed run again in 2024.
Against Hillary.
Yeah. I honestly, Simon, I'm weary of this same cycle. I'm weary of the Clinton cycle. I'm weary of, it's always the same individuals. I would love for something fresh, whether it's Trump, whether it's someone, else. I personally think we need someone who can be a unifying element, not only in word. Biden had that in word. Let's say, okay, Trump had that to a degree in word as well. Make America great again. And yes, you're right. There was a lot to be said for the policies that he instituted. There was a lot to be said for the standing in the world. But he wasn't a unifier. He alienated some of the people who could have been strong allies. He lost Arizona because he was insulting to John McCain. And there are a few things that you can look at and say, okay, yes, regardless of what happened in November, he shot himself in the foot one too many times.
Yep.
I don't know that it would be a good thing to set ourselves up for that again. He would, remember, only have one term that he could serve. Then we'd have to go through this again. So I would love to have a president who could have a solid 8 years to make some progress, who could have 4 years and then gain the people's trust, build on some stuff, and then have another 4 years.
But has American politics become too toxic?
Maybe.
So toxic because
Probably.
There's absolute hatred between the Republicans and the Democrats, and actually to have a candidate that could actually bring a little bit of healing and reconciliation, or has that gap between progressives and conservatives become so large that America could potentially be on a civil war footing?
Yeah, Simon, I think it is very toxic. I think that we probably are closer to a civil war than we've been since, the middle of the 19th century. And that does fit with, you have these individuals who part of their job is looking at statistics and kind of forecasting things. And I've, been aware of reports and things for years speculating on a coming division of the United States and it being carved up at some point. It's not functioning as a union. It is divided very, very much along party lines as well. It's how the divisions are. It would be great to have disagreements and division, and for that division and those disagreements to not be made personal against individuals, to not become almost raging and angry. I mean, Biden, when anyone has disagreed with him, just slates them. He really rages at times in some of his press conferences. But
I suppose the big question, maybe you can ask this with 2 minutes to go to the end of the program. We know that America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. It's not mentioned in the book of Revelation. It's not mentioned in any of the books. So we know that America will no longer be a world superpower in the last days. Do you think that President Biden may be the president that presides over the collapse of the United States of America? And I don't say that, I say that reluctantly. Yeah. I say that with a great pain in my heart because I know of the good that America's done in terms of spreading the gospel around the world, helping to preserve democracy and freedom around the world, coming to the defense of Europe not once, not twice, but 3 times during the First, Second, and also the Cold War.
Yeah, very, very, very quickly. I think it begins, you begin to see a heavy downturn with the Obama years. And it's maybe had some higher moments, but now it appears to be in steep decline. And personally, as much as I would like as an American citizen to say, yeah, it will come back, I don't think it's coming back.
Regan, absolute pleasure doing a program with you tonight, and we want to all thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines. What we can see really happening in America is a real lack of leadership in the world when the world needs American leadership. to confront the threats, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's a nuclear Iran. We need a strong America and a strong alliance in NATO to defend ourselves from these growing threats. So despite all the major problems, as we've discussed with Joe Biden, it's important that we pray for the United States, that we pray for the government of the United States. And after all, God is sovereign. And without his sovereignty, man can do nothing. So that's an important point that we need to make. So I want to thank you so much for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines.